The mop handle clattered against the polished concrete floor as maintenance specialist third-class Valentina Vega Kowalski watched the impossible unfold through the hangar's reinforced glass. Tower control had just cleared Runway 9 left, the primary combat strip at Naval Air Station Coronado, for an unscheduled arrival. No transponder code, no flight plan, just raw authority crackling through encrypted channels that made seasoned air traffic controllers snap to attention like rookies. All aircraft hold position, priority inbound, designation classified. The tower's voice carried that particular tension reserved for situations that could reshape careers or end them entirely. Vega's weathered hands tightened around the mop as she pressed closer to the window. 23 years of military service had taught her to recognize the difference between routine and revelation. This felt like the latter. The SEAL compound's training operations had ceased mid-exercise. Instructors who never showed deference to anyone were suddenly checking their uniforms and adjusting their posture. In the distance, a speck materialized against the Pacific's endless blue. Not the familiar silhouette of a transport or fighter, but something that moved with predatory precision. As it approached, the aircraft's profile became unmistakable, a modified FA-18 Super Hornet but wrong somehow. The paint scheme was matte black with silver accents that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No squadron markings, no tail numbers visible from this distance. "Jesus Christ," whispered Airman Rodriguez from behind her. "What kind of clearance does someone need to shut down Coronado's primary runway?" Vega didn't answer. Her focus had shifted to something that made her pulse quicken, the way the aircraft handled its approach. Too smooth, too confident. The pilot wasn't just landing, they were making a statement. Every adjustment, every subtle correction spoke of someone who understood that aircraft like an extension of their own body. The radio crackled again. "Vega 77, you are cleared for landing. Welcome home." The mop slipped from Vega's fingers entirely. Vega 77 wasn't a standard call sign. It was legend. Ghost stories whispered in ready rooms about a pilot who'd vanished during a classified operation 8 years ago. Someone whose records had been buried so deep that even mentioning their name could trigger security reviews. But legends didn't land modified Super Hornets on active runways. Legends didn't make entire military installations hold their breath. The aircraft touched down with barely a whisper of rubber against concrete, its reverse thrust system engaging with mechanical precision that spoke of hundreds of carrier landings. As it taxied toward the VIP hangar, Vega noticed something that made her chest tighten. The pilot's helmet, visible through the canopy, bore distinctive markings she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Someone was coming home, someone important enough to stop time itself. The hangar fell into absolute silence as engines wound down and pneumatic systems hissed their mechanical farewell. Even the ever-present California wind seemed to pause, as if the entire base was holding its collective breath. Maintenance crews appeared from nowhere, their movements precise and practiced, forming a reception that felt more like a ceremonial guard than standard aircraft servicing. Commander Jake Frost Morrison emerged from the administrative building, his dress whites immaculate despite the heat. Behind him walked a procession of officers whose combined ribbons and decorations represented decades of classified operations and unspoken sacrifices. These weren't men who impressed easily, yet their faces carried expressions of anticipation mixed with something deeper, respect that bordered on reverence. The Super Hornet's canopy cycled open with a soft hydraulic sigh, and the figure that emerged moved with fluid economy. Medium height, lean build, every gesture calculated and purposeful. The pilot's helmet came off in one smooth motion, revealing shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the afternoon sun like burnished copper. When she turned toward the reception committee, Vega caught her first clear glimpse of a face that seemed carved from memory and legend. Captain Maya Revenant Castellanos, the woman who'd earned her call sign by returning from missions that should have been one-way trips, the pilot who disappeared during Operation Ghostwalker, taking with her classified technology worth more than most countries' entire defense budgets. For 8 years, the official story had been killed in action, remains unrecovered. The unofficial story, whispered in dark corners of military bars, suggested something far more complex. She approached Commander Morrison with measured steps, her flight suit bearing patches that Vega didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on the angle of view. When she rendered a textbook salute, Morrison's return gesture carried weight that transcended mere military courtesy. "Permission to come aboard, sir." Her voice held traces of an accent that belonged to no single place, as if years of deep cover had worn away geographical origins. "Granted, Captain. Welcome back to the land of the living." Morrison's response carried undertones that made surrounding personnel exchange glances. "Your timing, as always, is impeccable." Revenant's smile held shadows that spoke of classified operations and impossible choices. "Sir, I believe there's a situation that requires my particular expertise." From her position at the hangar window, Vega watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't a homecoming. It was activation. Somewhere in the world, something had gone wrong enough to recall a ghost from whatever shadows she'd inhabited for nearly a decade. The kind of wrong that required capabilities so specialized that only one person could handle them. The afternoon sun continued its westward journey, casting long shadows across the tarmac as official vehicles arrived to whisk Revenant toward whatever crisis had summoned her return. The briefing room's subdued lighting cast harsh shadows across classified documents that hadn't existed an hour ago. Maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence reports covered every available surface, creating a mosaic of global crisis that made seasoned operators shift uncomfortably in their chairs. At the room's head, Admiral Patricia Hammer Chen commanded attention with the kind of presence that came from decades of making decisions that shaped history. "Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Lazarus is now active." Her voice carried authority that brooked no questions. "What I'm about to share doesn't leave this room. Acknowledgement is nonverbal only." Nods rippled through the assembled personnel. Revenant sat at the table's far end, her expression unreadable as she processed information that would have overwhelmed less experienced minds. Beside her, Commander Morrison reviewed dossiers with the methodical precision of someone preparing for war. 72 hours ago, our early warning systems detected massive energy signatures emanating from a classified facility in the Kuril Islands. Admiral Chen's pointer traced coordinates that made several officers lean forward. The installation was believed abandoned since the Cold War's end. We were wrong. The main screen flickered to life, displaying satellite imagery that seemed almost too clear to be real. Structures that shouldn't exist. Technology that belonged to no known military force. Energy readings that defied conventional understanding. Whatever they're building, it's operational. Our intelligence suggests a weapons system capable of disabling military electronics across a 1,000-mile radius. Every aircraft, every ship, every communications array dead in the water. Chen's words carried implications that needed no elaboration. "Gentlemen, they're preparing to end modern warfare as we know it." Revenant spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Ma'am, what's the proposed countermeasure?" Admiral Chen's smile held no warmth. "You are, Captain. Your modified Super Hornet is the only aircraft in our inventory specifically designed to operate in high electromagnetic environments. The Ghostwalker program wasn't just about stealth. It was about surviving in electronic warfare scenarios that would cripple conventional systems." Understanding dawned across Revenant's features like sunrise breaking over dark water. "This is why I was kept operational, why my death was staged. You've been preparing for this specific threat. For 8 years, Captain. Every modification to your aircraft, every training scenario you've endured in isolation, it all led to this moment." Chen's voice carried the weight of classified decisions made by people who saw decades into the future. The question is, are you ready to be officially dead again? The room fell silent as Revenant processed implications that extended far beyond personal sacrifice. Success meant preventing a global catastrophe. Failure meant more than death. It meant the end of military aviation as humanity knew it. Her fingers traced the edge of a classified document bearing technical specifications that had cost billions to develop and implement. The mission would require penetrating hostile airspace alone, with no backup and no support. Just one pilot against technology that could reshape the balance of global power. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos finished her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had kept pilots alive for 15 years. The modified FA-18 Super Hornet designated Vega 77 represented technological achievement that pushed the boundaries of what aircraft could accomplish. Every surface had been treated with radar-absorbing materials that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. The engines hummed with harmonic frequencies that suggested modifications extending far beyond standard specifications. "She's ready, Captain." Santos's voice carried professional pride mixed with concern that transcended routine pre-flight protocols. "All systems are green, but I want you to know, this bird's been waiting for you. Every maintenance cycle, every system check, it's like she knew you'd be back." Revenant ran her hand along the aircraft's nose cone, feeling vibrations that spoke of barely contained power. The Ghostwalker modifications had transformed what was already one of the world's most capable fighters into something that existed in the spaces between conventional understanding and science fiction. Electromagnetic shielding, advanced countermeasures, and flight characteristics that defied traditional aerodynamic principles. "Thank you, Maria. Take care of the ground crew while I'm gone." The words carried finality that made Santos step back involuntarily. Climbing into the cockpit felt like putting on familiar clothes after years of exile. Every switch, every display, every control surface responded to her touch with mechanical intimacy that transcended mere training. The heads-up display activated with information cascades that would have overwhelmed pilots accustomed to conventional systems. Navigation data, threat assessment matrices, and electromagnetic spectrum analysis flowed across multiple screens in patterns that somehow made perfect sense. "Tower, this is Vega 77 requesting clearance for departure." "Vega 77, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting." The tower controller's voice carried emotion that violated standard communication protocols, but no one seemed to care. This departure felt different from routine training flights or standard combat missions. This felt like watching history pivot on the decisions of a single person. Afterburners engaged with controlled fury that pressed Revenant deep into her ejection seat. The Super Hornet accelerated down runway 9 left with authority that spoke of engineering pushed beyond normal limitations. Rotation came at exactly the calculated speed, lifting her into California sky that seemed infinitely vast compared to the confined spaces she'd inhabited during 8 years of isolation. Banking northwest toward the Pacific, she felt the aircraft respond to her intentions with precision that bordered on telepathic. This was what the Ghostwalker program had been designed to create: perfect integration between human decision-making and technological capability. A platform that could operate in environments where conventional aircraft would become expensive debris. Below, the coastline fell away as she climbed through flight levels that would take her beyond normal air traffic control coverage. Ahead lay 12 hours of flying that would test every system, every modification, every lesson learned during years of classified preparation. The mission profile called for radio silence until target acquisition, no communication with friendly forces, no backup plans, just one pilot, one aircraft, and whatever waited in the Kuril Islands. As the California coast disappeared behind her, Revenant settled into the rhythm of long-range flight that had defined her career before official death had granted her a different kind of existence. The Pacific stretched endlessly ahead, its surface broken only by whitecaps that caught afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. Weather reports indicated clear skies for the first 8 hours, followed by a storm front that would provide natural cover for the final approach. Flight systems hummed with electronic efficiency that spoke of countless hours of fine-tuning. Every gauge showed parameters within acceptable ranges. Every warning light remained dark. The aircraft felt eager, almost alive with anticipation for the mission it had been designed to accomplish. Fuel consumption tracked precisely with mission planning calculations, leaving adequate reserves for combat maneuvering and emergency contingencies. Hours passed in the meditative trance that long-distance pilots knew intimately. Autopilot handled routine course corrections while Revenant monitored systems and reviewed tactical plans that had been refined through endless simulation. The target facility's layout was burned into her memory. Every building, every defensive position, every approach vector that might provide tactical advantage. Intelligence reports painted a picture of sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities that could disable incoming threats before weapons systems could achieve target lock. Traditional cruise missiles had proven ineffective. Stealth aircraft had simply vanished from radar coverage without achieving mission objectives. The electromagnetic pulses emanating from the facility had rendered conventional attack profiles obsolete. But the Ghostwalker program had anticipated exactly this scenario. Every component of her aircraft had been hardened against electronic warfare beyond military specification standards. Backup systems had backup systems, all operating on different frequencies and principles to ensure mission capability even in extreme electromagnetic environments. She was flying technology that existed 5 years ahead of anything else in the global inventory. Radio silence meant no weather updates, no course corrections from ground control, no human voices to break the isolation of high-altitude flight. Just the constant whisper of air flowing over control surfaces and the barely audible hum of engines operating at peak efficiency. Navigation relied entirely on internal systems that couldn't be jammed or spoofed by hostile electronic countermeasures. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Pacific in shades of orange and gold that reminded her of training flights from what felt like another lifetime. Before Ghostwalker, before official death, before years of preparation for a mission that might determine whether modern warfare would continue to exist in its current form. As darkness approached, she began final preparations for the most dangerous 12 hours of her career. Systems checks confirmed full operational status, weapons systems armed and ready, electronic countermeasures operating at maximum effectiveness. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Now came the part that no amount of training could fully simulate. Flying alone into unknown dangers with nothing but skill, technology, and determination standing between success and catastrophic failure. Nightfall brought clarity that daylight couldn't provide. Star navigation became primary backup to GPS systems that might face jamming attempts as she approached hostile territory. The Pacific had transformed from welcoming blue to obsidian mirror that reflected constellations with perfect precision. Flying at 35,000 feet felt like traveling through space itself, suspended between the infinite above and the infinite below. Fuel consumption remained within acceptable parameters despite headwinds that had required minor course corrections. The weather front ahead showed on radar as a massive system that would provide ideal cover for final approach to target. Lightning illuminated cloud formations from within, creating natural light shows that would mask any electromagnetic signatures her aircraft might generate. System diagnostics continued running background checks on every component critical to mission success. The electromagnetic shielding showed green across all monitoring points. Stealth capabilities remained at maximum effectiveness. Weapons systems maintained ready status without any indication of malfunction or degradation. Every modification that had cost billions to develop and implement was functioning exactly as designed. Radio intercepts began picking up transmissions from the target area. Russian communications protocols mixed with technical language that didn't match any known military terminology. Energy readings that defied conventional understanding of physics. Status reports that suggested operational timeline accelerating beyond intelligence estimates. Whatever they were building, it was nearly complete. The storm front loomed ahead like a wall of electric fury that stretched from sea level to the stratosphere. Weather radar showed turbulence patterns that would challenge even the most experienced pilots, but also electromagnetic chaos that would provide perfect concealment from hostile detection systems. Flying through the storm would be dangerous. Flying around it would be suicide. She began descent toward flight levels that would allow storm penetration while maintaining adequate altitude for target approach. The Super Hornet's modifications included enhanced weather radar and turbulence compensation systems that would help maintain control in conditions that could tear conventional aircraft apart. But ultimately, success would depend on pilot skill, developed through thousands of hours in every conceivable flight condition. Lightning began illuminating the cockpit with strobing white light that made instrument readings dance and flicker. Thunder reached her even through the aircraft's sound insulation, a constant rumble that spoke of atmospheric forces beyond human control. The storm wasn't just weather. It was nature's own electronic warfare environment that would test every system to its absolute limits. Entering the storm felt like diving into chaos itself. Turbulence threw the aircraft in directions that gravity wasn't supposed to allow. Hail hammered the canopy with impacts that sounded like machine gun fire. Wind shears attempted to flip her inverted at airspeeds that would have been fatal if not for the Ghostwalker program's enhanced control systems. But through it all, the modified Super Hornet flew with determination that transcended mere mechanical function. This was what she had been built for, operating in environments where other aircraft couldn't survive. Lightning struck directly overhead, temporarily blinding her before backup systems compensated with auto-darkening displays. The electromagnetic pulse should have disabled every electronic system on board. Instead, the shielding held firm, and all systems continued operating as if nothing had happened. Years of development and testing had created an aircraft that could survive nature's most violent electromagnetic events. As she emerged from the storm's eastern edge, the Kuril Islands appeared on radar like ancient sentinels guarding secrets that nations would kill to possess. Intelligence had been accurate. Energy signatures emanating from the target facility were unlike anything in known military inventories. Power levels that suggested technology operating on principles that pushed the boundaries of current scientific understanding. The final approach would require flying nap-of-the-earth profiles that would bring her within meters of mountainous terrain while avoiding detection systems that could track objects the size of birds. Every valley, every ridge, every approach vector had been memorized through months of satellite imagery analysis and terrain mapping that bordered on obsessive preparation. But as she descended toward attack altitude, new readings began appearing on her threat warning displays. Electronic signatures that didn't match intelligence reports, defensive systems that shouldn't have been operational yet. The enemy had been expecting her. Air defense radars painted her aircraft with targeting beams that should have been impossible to maintain lock through her stealth systems. Surface-to-air missiles began tracking movements that no conventional radar could have detected. The facility's defensive network was operating with capabilities that exceeded every intelligence estimate by orders of magnitude. Warning alarms filled the cockpit with electronic urgency that demanded immediate evasive action. Chaff and flare dispensers activated automatically, filling the night sky with countermeasures designed to confuse incoming missiles. The Super Hornet banked hard left, pulling G-forces that pushed her consciousness toward blackout thresholds, while automated systems fought to maintain aircraft control. A missile streaked past the canopy close enough to feel heat through the cockpit's environmental systems. Its proximity fuse had been confused by the electronic countermeasures, but only barely. The next one might not be fooled so easily. She needed altitude for maneuvering room, but climbing would expose her to radar coverage that could vector additional threats onto her position. The facility appeared ahead through the darkness like a technological cancer spreading across natural landscape. Structures that defied architectural logic surrounded a central complex that pulsed with energy readings off every scale. Whatever they had built, it was not only operational but actively scanning for threats with systems that seemed to understand her aircraft's capabilities better than her own intelligence briefings had suggested. Electronic warfare systems engaged with full power, attempting to jam hostile tracking radars while maintaining her own targeting solutions. The modified AGM-88 HARM missiles in her weapons bay required positive lock on enemy emitters before launch, but the defensive network was cycling through frequencies too rapidly for conventional targeting systems to maintain solid tracking data. She needed to get closer, close enough for visual identification of primary targets, close enough that electronic countermeasures couldn't break weapons guidance locks, close enough that missing would be impossible because there wouldn't be time for second chances. Banking toward a valley approach that would mask her from primary radar coverage, she began the attack run that would determine whether humanity's technological edge could survive the next decade. The facility's defenses were impressive, but they had been designed to stop conventional attacks by conventional aircraft. They had never faced a ghost who refused to stay dead. The valley approach provided temporary concealment from primary search radars, but passive sensors continued tracking her heat signature despite the Super Hornet's advanced infrared suppression systems. Ground-based laser designators painted her aircraft with targeting beams that suggested directed energy weapons capable of instant aircraft destruction. This wasn't just an electromagnetic pulse facility. It was a comprehensive area denial system designed to eliminate any airborne threat. Nap-of-the-Earth flight required absolute precision at airspeeds that left zero margin for navigational error. Mountain peaks flashed past her wingtips, with clearances measured in meters rather than the kilometers that provided safety margins in normal operations. Terrain following radar painted the landscape ahead, while she manually flew corrections that kept her below defensive coverage while maintaining attack approach parameters. Electronic intelligence gathering systems recorded every emission from the facility for later analysis, assuming she survived to transmit the data. What they found defied current understanding of directed energy weapons and electromagnetic pulse generation. Power levels that should have required nuclear reactors were being generated by technology that operated on unknown principles. The intelligence implications extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. A new threat warning appeared on her displays, something that shouldn't have been possible. The facility was generating a localized electromagnetic field strong enough to disrupt her navigation systems from 30 kilometers away. GPS signals flickered and died. Inertial navigation began showing drift patterns that suggested external magnetic interference. Even her backup compass was spinning wildly as electromagnetic chaos played havoc with basic navigational principles. She was flying blind through mountain terrain at 400 knots with no reliable way to determine her exact position. Landing would be impossible even if she could reach friendly territory. This had become a one-way mission in every sense of the term. But the Ghostwalker modifications had anticipated exactly this scenario. Emergency navigation systems activated, using star fixes and terrain correlation to maintain approximate position data even in extreme electromagnetic environments. The artificial intelligence systems built into her flight computers began compensating for instrument failures with calculated guesses based on last known position and flight trajectory. The facility appeared to head through a gap in the mountains like something from science fiction nightmare. Energy discharges arced between transmission towers that stretched toward the sky like technological lightning rods. The central complex pulsed with light patterns that suggested massive power generation systems operating beyond any known engineering principles. Whatever they had built here was not just advanced, it was revolutionary. Target acquisition systems struggled to maintain lock through electromagnetic interference that grew stronger with each kilometer of approach. The HARM missiles required clear targeting data to achieve guidance lock, but defensive emissions were cycling through frequency ranges faster than her systems could track. She would have to get close enough for visual bombing approaches using iron bombs that couldn't be jammed or confused by electronic countermeasures. Banking into final attack position, she armed weapons systems that had been designed specifically for this target. Not just high-explosive warheads, but specialized munitions that would neutralize electronic systems without triggering nuclear responses. The mission wasn't just about destroying the facility. It was about capturing enough intelligence data to understand how the technology worked. Ground fire began reaching toward her aircraft as defensive systems detected her approach. Tracer rounds created streams of light that painted geometric patterns against the darkness, while radar-guided flak bursts exploded close enough to rattle the airframe. The facility's defenders had been expecting exactly this type of attack and were prepared with countermeasures that turned the surrounding airspace into a three-dimensional killing field. But she had trained for this. Every evasive maneuver, every attack approach, every defensive counter had been practiced until they became instinctive responses that didn't require conscious thought. Flying through hostile fire was just another day at the office for someone who had officially been dead for 8 years. The target grew larger in her heads-up display as she committed to the attack run that would determine the mission's success or failure. Warning systems screamed alerts about multiple missile locks and incoming fire, but there was no turning back now. Either the facility would be destroyed, or she would become the latest casualty in a war that most people didn't know was being fought. Weapons bay doors cycled open as targeting systems achieved final lock on primary objectives. Everything she had trained for, everything the Ghostwalker program had been designed to accomplish, came down to the next 30 seconds of flight time. The first missile left its pylon with electronic precision that spoke of guidance systems operating at the edge of technological possibility. Despite electromagnetic interference that should have made targeting impossible, the weapon tracked true toward the facility's primary power generation complex. Proximity sensors would detonate the warhead at optimal distance for maximum structural damage, while specialized electronics recorded every detail of the target's defensive responses. Ground-based defensive systems engaged with desperation that suggested the facility's importance exceeded even classified intelligence estimates. Interceptor missiles launched from concealed positions, while directed energy weapons painted the sky with coherent light that left afterimages burned across her retinas. The electromagnetic pulse generator itself began cycling to full power, preparing to flood the surrounding area with energy levels that would disable any electronic system within a 50-kilometer radius. Her second missile followed a different trajectory, programmed to arrive simultaneously despite the varied flight paths. Redundant targeting ensured that even if one weapon was intercepted, the other would achieve mission objectives. The warheads contained not just high explosives, but advanced electronics designed to survive electromagnetic pulses long enough to transmit detailed intelligence about the facility's defensive capabilities. Defensive fire intensified to levels that transformed the night sky into a technological light show. Tracer rounds created overlapping cones of destruction, while surface-to-air missiles maneuvered with precision that suggested guidance systems operating beyond current military specifications. The facility wasn't just defended, it was protected by technology that belonged decades in the future. Both missiles achieved target impact within milliseconds of each other. The explosions lit up the valley like miniature suns, their combined energy release sending shockwaves that rattled the Super Hornet's airframe despite her altitude and distance from the blast zone. Secondary explosions began cascading through the facility as power distribution systems overloaded and fuel storage areas ignited in sympathetic detonations. But the electromagnetic pulse generator itself remained operational. Emergency power systems had activated automatically, maintaining the weapon's charging cycle despite catastrophic damage to supporting infrastructure. Within minutes, it would reach full operational capacity and flood the surrounding area with electromagnetic energy that would end her mission permanently. She needed to make another attack run, closer this time, close enough to guarantee weapon effects on the primary target despite whatever defensive systems remained operational, close enough that survival would be measured in seconds rather than minutes. Banking hard right, she began circling back toward the facility through airspace that now resembled an active volcano of ground fire and missile contrails. Her remaining weapons consisted of 2 iron bombs that couldn't be jammed, but required direct overflights of heavily defended positions. Getting close enough for accurate delivery meant flying through the worst defensive fire she had ever encountered. Threat warning systems had given up trying to prioritize targets. Every display showed solid red indicating multiple missile locks, radar tracking, and imminent destruction from sources that covered every possible attack vector. The facility's defenders were throwing everything they had at her aircraft, creating overlapping fields of fire that should have been impossible to penetrate. But impossible was what the Ghostwalker program had been designed to accomplish. Electronic countermeasures engaged at maximum power levels, filling the electromagnetic spectrum with false targets and jamming signals that confused hostile tracking systems long enough for her to maneuver into attack position. Chaff and flare dispensers created clouds of countermeasures that turned missile guidance systems against each other while she dove toward the target through gaps in the defensive coverage that existed for seconds at a time. The electromagnetic pulse generator filled her forward vision like a technological mountain that pulsed with barely contained energy. Its charging cycle was nearly complete. Power readings indicated weapon activation within the next 60 seconds. Once operational, the device would create an electromagnetic field strong enough to disable every electronic system for hundreds of kilometers. Military bases, civilian infrastructure, aircraft in flight, everything would simply stop working as the modern world reverted to pre-electronic technology levels. She pickled off her final 2 weapons at minimum safe distance, their iron construction immune to electronic countermeasures but requiring precise timing to achieve optimal target effects. The bombs fell through defensive fire that grew more intense with each meter of descent, their ballistic trajectories carrying them toward the pulse generator's primary focusing array. Ground impact occurred exactly on schedule. The facility's central complex disappeared in overlapping fireballs that sent debris fountaining hundreds of meters into the air. Power distribution systems overloaded and failed, plunging the surrounding area into darkness, broken only by the fires consuming what remained of 8 years of technological development. But her mission wasn't finished yet. Intelligence data recorded during the attack needed to reach friendly forces, and her aircraft's electromagnetic shielding wouldn't protect her forever from the residual energy fields still radiating from damaged equipment. She needed distance from the target area, and altitude for data transmission to satellite relay systems that could forward critical intelligence to mission planners. Climbing through smoke and debris that filled the valley like technological fog, she began transmitting coded bursts that contained everything her sensors had recorded during the attack. Weapon system effectiveness, defensive capabilities, electromagnetic signatures that would help engineers understand how the pulse generator had been constructed and operated. The data streams completed transmission just as her threat warning displays lit up with new contacts. Fighter aircraft approaching from the north, their radar signatures indicating advanced interceptors with capabilities that matched or exceeded her own Super Hornet's performance specifications. The facility had been important enough to warrant protective air patrols that had been vectored onto her position, despite the electromagnetic chaos of the attack. She was about to discover whether the Ghostwalker program's modifications were sufficient to handle conventional air-to-air combat against opponents who knew she was coming. Two Sukhoi Su-57 fighters emerged from the northern darkness like technological predators that had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Their radar signatures indicated full combat configuration with air-to-air missiles and electronic warfare systems designed specifically to counter stealth aircraft. These weren't patrol flights. They were hunter-killers that had been positioned to intercept any surviving attackers. Her radar warning receiver painted the approaching fighters with targeting symbols that indicated active missile guidance systems. They were already launching beyond visual range weapons that would arrive in less than 2 minutes. The electromagnetic interference from the damaged facility provided some concealment, but not enough to break missile guidance locks maintained by advanced seekers operating on multiple frequency bands. Evasive maneuvers began immediately. The Super Hornet banked into a descending spiral that used terrain masking to break line-of-sight targeting, while electronic countermeasures attempted to spoof incoming missiles with false positives and ghost targets. Chaff and flare dispensers cycled continuously, creating clouds of countermeasures that filled the sky with decoys designed to confuse hostile guidance systems. The first missile missed by meters, its proximity fuse triggered by chaff bundles that simulated aircraft radar returns. The second weapon tracked true despite electronic countermeasures, forcing her into violent maneuvering that pushed the airframe to structural limits, while automated systems fought to maintain controlled flight. G-forces pressed her deep into the ejection seat as the Super Hornet pulled angles of attack that would have torn conventional fighters apart. But the Ghostwalker modifications included enhanced maneuverability systems that operated beyond normal aerodynamic principles. Thrust vectoring and flight control computers allowed sustained maneuvering at angles of attack that defied traditional understanding of aircraft performance. She could out-turn, out-climb, and out-accelerate opponents who were flying conventional aircraft despite their advanced specifications. The Su-57s closed to within visual range, their pilots clearly trained in tactics designed to counter stealth aircraft operating alone in hostile airspace. They were attempting to force her into a turning fight where superior numbers would overcome technological advantages. Standard doctrine called for maintaining separation and using long-range weapons to achieve kills without entering knife-fight range. But she wasn't following standard doctrine. Instead of running, she turned toward the approaching fighters with aggressive intent that caught their pilots off guard. The Super Hornet's nose swung around to present a head-on aspect that should have been suicidal against two opponents with equal or superior weapon systems. Her targeting radar locked onto the lead fighter, while her remaining AIM-120 missiles armed for launch. The engagement became a three-dimensional chess game played at supersonic speeds, with lethal consequences for wrong moves. Each pilot maneuvered for advantage, while maintaining awareness of weapons envelopes, terrain limitations, and electromagnetic interference that affected targeting systems and communication with ground controllers. Split-second decisions would determine who survived the next 30 seconds of combat. Her missile launch caught the lead Su-57 pilot in a moment of tactical transition, his defensive systems not quite ready for a head-on engagement at minimum range. The AIM-120 tracked true through electromagnetic interference that should have broken guidance lock, its advanced seeker head maintaining target discrimination, despite intense electronic countermeasures from both hostile aircraft. Impact occurred at combined closure rates exceeding Mach 3. The lead fighter disappeared in an expanding fireball that lit up the night sky while debris rained down across several square kilometers of mountainous terrain. One threat eliminated, but the second Su-57 was maneuvering for missile launch position with precision that spoke of pilot experience and aircraft capabilities that matched her own. The dogfight that followed pushed both aircraft and pilots to absolute performance limits. Vertical climbs, inverted dives, high-G turns that tested consciousness and aircraft structural integrity, while each pilot sought the microsecond advantage that would enable a killing shot. Neither aircraft carried unlimited ammunition, and fuel consumption during combat maneuvering was reducing engagement time to minutes rather than hours. She needed to end this quickly, before fuel exhaustion forced a conclusion that would favor her opponent's proximity to friendly bases and support infrastructure. The second Su-57 pilot was skilled and aggressive, using every advantage his aircraft provided while avoiding the mistakes that had cost his wingman's life. This would be decided by pilot skill rather than technological superiority. The breakthrough came during a high-G climbing turn that pushed both aircraft toward their absolute performance envelopes. Her opponent's aircraft, despite its advanced specifications, began showing signs of aerodynamic stress that affected maneuvering precision. The Ghostwalker modifications provided just enough additional capability to maintain controlled flight, while her opponent struggled with systems that were reaching operational limits. Her final missile achieved lock during a brief moment when the Su-57 defensive systems were overwhelmed by the combination of G-forces, electromagnetic interference, and the pilot's diminished consciousness under sustained high-G loading. The AIM-120 tracked through defensive countermeasures with electronic determination that spoke of guidance systems designed to operate in exactly these conditions. The second explosion painted the sky with debris that marked the end of immediate aerial threats. But her fuel situation had become critical during the extended combat maneuvering, and the nearest friendly territory lay across hundreds of kilometers of hostile airspace that would certainly contain additional interceptors vectored toward her position. The mission had been successful, but survival remained uncertain. She began calculating flight profiles that would maximize range while avoiding known defensive positions, knowing that every minute brought her closer to fuel exhaustion and a forced landing that would end her career permanently. Behind her, the destroyed facility continued burning like a technological funeral pyre that marked the end of one threat and possibly the beginning of others. The intelligence data she had transmitted would reshape military planning for decades, assuming she survived long enough for analysts to process the information properly. The Pacific stretched ahead like a dark promise of sanctuary that remained hundreds of